Welcome to MatheNatic. We are busy revising statistics for grade 12 mathematics. In this video, we'll focus on grouped data and we'll learn how to represent it on an Ogive or cumulative frequency graph. So let's dive into the example. It says the results of 50 learners are represented in the table below. So here we have a frequency table, and you can see the results of these 15 learners are divided into intervals. So each of these inequalities represent an interval. So in our first set, between 0 and 20%, we have 4 values. Now notice we don't know what these 4 values are. We just know that these 4 values lie within 0 to 20%. And between 20 and 40, we have 11 values. Between 40 and 60, 20 values. Between 60 and 80, 10. And between 80 and 100, 5. So if you add these frequencies up, that will add up to 50. And we know where each of these individual results lie. So before I get into completing the cumulative frequency column, can you see that the interval with the most data points, or the highest frequency, is between 40 and 60? And this interval of 40 to 60 is called the modal class. So remember, in ungrouped data, we spoke about the mode. That is the value that occurs the most. But the modal class is the interval with the highest frequency. So it's almost like mode, but it's not a value that repeats. It's the interval with the highest frequency. The first type of question that we have with the frequency table is complete the cumulative frequency column. So the cumulative frequency column is a column separate from the frequency. Cumulative means the total up until a point. So if I only look at the first line, can you see we have a total of 4 people that we have considered. Now if I move to the second line, we have 4 plus 11. So the cumulative frequency here is 15. So that's the total up until this interval. And this 15 includes both the first and second interval. So we can continue with that pattern to find the cumulative frequency for every line. So in the third line, we have 4 plus 11 plus 20, and the total is 35. Or you can say it's 15 plus 20, and it'll also give you to 35. For the next line of 45, we have 4 plus 11 plus 20 plus 10, and that gives us 45. Or we can say 35 plus 10, which will also give us 45. And then for the last line, our grand total would be 50. So an easy way to check whether or not your cumulative frequency table is correct is to match the total at the end with the total in the question. So we have observed 50 learners, and the total at the end here is also 50. For the next question, we are going to draw the cumulative frequency curve, or the Ogive. So these two are synonymous terms. And I like to speak about the curve, but other teachers like to speak about the Ogive. So what we have here is the vertical line that represents the cumulative frequency. Remember, this is the cumulative frequency curve, so we won't work with the actual frequency. And your horizontal axis, you have the marks. And can you see the marks go from 0 to 20? So those intervals are showed here as 0 to 20. And we jump with 20 every time up until we get to 100. And that represents what we had in our frequency table as well. So the first note that I want you to make is that the Ogive must be a curve. So you cannot connect the data points with a ruler because it needs to represent a curve. So make sure, even if your freehand is a little bit dodgy, that you try and show that it's some sort of curved line. So do not connect dots with a ruler, because when you connect the dots or the data points with a ruler, you no longer have a curve. The next part here is the grounding or the lower boundary. So in our table, our lower boundary was 0. So the value that you start with here on the horizontal axis is also 0. But you need to be careful. In some exams or tests, they like to make that, for example, 5. So if the first value here was 5, your grounding won't be at 0. It will be on the horizontal line at 5. And that will be your first point that you plot. So that is called the grounding. Then for the other values that you plot, you would use the maximum of each interval paired with the cumulative frequency. So your first coordinate, the x value is 20, and the y value would be 4. So if you look on the graph here, we have 20 and 4. For the next line, we have 40 and 15. So here is your 40 and 15. The third dot is our third interval of 60 and 35. Then we have 80 and 45. And lastly, we have 150. And what I want you to notice is that my cumulative frequency curve stops at 100. I don't extend beyond that point even a little bit, because the highest value that we can possibly consider is 100. So the line or the curve would stop exactly there. And that now is how we draw the cumulative frequency curve. And for the last question on this video, I want to show you how we can find the median, the lower quartile, and the upper quartile for grouped data when we need to use the ogive or the curve. So in total, we have 50 learners that we have observed. And for the median, the lower quartile, and the upper quartile, we will estimate these values. So let's start at the median. The median represents the middle of the data. So if we have considered 50 people, half of 50 would be 25. So here on the cumulative frequency axis, we will have a plot at 25. And this represents the position of the median. So 25 is not the actual median, it's simply the position. Then I plot or use my ruler to plot a horizontal line that hits the curve, and then I go straight down. And I estimate that the median mark is 52. Now, can you see I'm using the curly equation sign because I'm estimating that median value. Now, for the lower quartile, we need to consider half of the half. So we have 25 students, and half of 25 would be the lower quartile. So that is at position 12.5. Now, obviously, we don't have a 12.5, but we can plot here 12.5. Another way to do that for the lower quartile is we take the total, which is 50, and we divide it by 4. And that's also 12.5. Now remember, this 12.5 represents the position of the lower quartile. So if I plot a horizontal line and then straight down to the marks, I estimate that the lower quartile is 36. And then lastly, for the upper quartile, I take the amount of learners that I have, I divide that by 4 and multiply by 3. So think about it, quartile 3, the word quartile sounds like quarters, and I need to divide the data into 3 quarters. So you can take 50 and multiply it by 3 quarters, and you would get 37.5. Now that 37.5 is here on this vertical axis, But again, this represents the position. So this represents the position of quartile 3. But if I plot a horizontal line to the curve and then vertically straight down, I estimate that the upper quartile is equal to 66. So that is how we use a frequency table to find the cumulative frequency and plot the ogive. Please remember the grounding and also that the ogive must be a curve. And remember, we do not move past the maximum possible value. Thank you for watching. Remember to show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to MatheNatic.